Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives on Sustainable Development, Episode 9. I'm your host, Chris Whitehead, and we're going to be talking about public policy development today. We spent the last few episodes talking about challenges we're currently facing and trying to tackle climate change in our country. And we spent the last episode talking about the changes that are going on actually in the Arctic and why that's so critically important. Now I thought, especially with what's going on currently in Washington, as they debate what what President Trump is calling the one big beautiful bill, which I still kind of laugh a little bit every time I have to read that. How do you do public policy properly? How do you factor in economic, environmental, and social impacts of a potential policy to know that you are accounting for everything you should be accounting for? And if you don't do that, does it bring up does it bring up unnecessary and undue actual risks? Um, and I'm excited for today because I spend a lot of time trying to pair up experts exactly right and to have good conversations and challenging conversations with people who have spent their lives professionally doing these things. And if you're going to learn from anybody, try to learn from someone who's actually been in the trenches. And I kind of hate that term, but I'm going to actually use it anyway. But it it matters. Experience in these issues that definitely really matters. There's always room to bring in new ideas and to potentially streamline processes. But if you haven't done it before, if you haven't been there, you should always assume that there's more to learn. And hopefully we can do that here today because as we speak in every episode, there are many, many challenges in front of us, but it's only by being objective and passionate on these issues that anything is going to happen, frankly. Anything is going to help move that needle. So, with that note, I am excited to bring on our experts for today. We have Ryan Hathaway and Sandra Whitehead. And before anyone asks, I am not related to Sandra, so I'll just get that out there now. And if you could both come on audio and video, please. Good morning. How are you?
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Doing well, thanks. How are you?
Oh, not too shabby. It's kind of funny. This is the first one of these I've actually recorded in the morning, so I'm enjoying hearing the birds chirping outside a little bit. Um, but I guess let's just get started, ladies first. If you can give a quick intro, Sandra.
Sure. I'm Sandra Whitehead. I am the professor and chair of urban planning at George Washington University. In my past life, though, I was the director of programs for the National Environmental Health Association, and I've worked for state health department. I've worked for local government as a planner. My educational background is in policy development and organizational transformation through policy change in using a public health lens to do that. So health in all policies is the umbrella term that we use, and all the tools that go along with that: health impact assessment, cumulative impact assessment, health lens analysis. So this really is right where I have lived, this health in the built environment for the last 30 years.
Thank you for that. And also something that I actually first noticed Dr. Whitehead's work was her time on her time spent at actually National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and that's probably where our work overlaps the most. But again, thank you for being here. I'm excited for the chat.
Appreciate the
Ryan,
invite.
next, please.
Yeah, hi, Ryan Hathaway. I am the Director for Environmental and Climate Justice at Lawyers for Good Government. I've also, prior to that, was a career civil servant in the federal government for about 15 years, a little bit over. The last 2.5 years, I was the senior career official for environmental justice in the federal government. I was the director for environmental justice and director of the White House Interagency Council on Environmental Justice and the Executive Office of the President at CEQ, or the Council on Environmental Quality, for those of you who don't do the federal government acronym. I have been around in a lot of different places in the federal government making and implementing policy. I worked on planning and NEPA at the Bureau of Land Management. I worked on major infrastructure, renewable energy, and large scale energy permitting in the Secretary's office at Department of Interior. I have done data driven solutions and databases, and also worked in community meetings and in field offices where we developed oil and gas in North Dakota, or did environmental inspections across the northeast quadrant of the United States. So I've been around. I've done everything from delivering mail in the federal government to, preparing a brief for the president. So I feel like I've seen all the aspects of implementation and policy. And then I am also adjunct faculty at Harvard. I teach a class on environmental justice there for the extension school.
Well, again, thank you very much and very impressive. And that's actually something we have in common then, Ryan, because I'm currently considering an offer to be an adjunct faculty at a school here in Jersey. So that'll be
Awesome.
my first foray down that path. So if I decide to go that way, I might be pegging you with a couple emails.
Please do. Yeah, I've been teaching on and off for a while, but I still borrow from other people who do it more regularly.
Awesome. Sandra's actually same with obviously with you too. It's an exciting time though, for sure. Um, all right, I want to get started with developing large scale projects, which is something you guys both have experience in at various levels, and why it's as critical as it is to, as I said during the introduction, factor in environmental, economic, and social impacts from those projects before we actually put shovels in the ground.
Well, I think, from my perspective anyway, especially very large projects, if you are engaging the community ahead of time, if the community knows what's happening and you're not doing things to them, you're doing things with them, you will have a better project because it'll be better designed. It will be less controversial, meaning that you will spend a lot less time in court than you might otherwise. You will have an opportunity to ameliorate any negative impacts ahead of time and to think about how you can amplify positive impacts of your project. And if you have that buy-in and that regular communication with the community throughout your planning process for your project, then your implementation will go much smoother, right? I'm not saying it'll be, free of problems, but you'll have those open communication lines, both with your regulators and with the community. And if you're really engaging people authentically, it will enrich your project and make it better, I think.
Interesting, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Dr. Whitehead just said. And also I will say it builds much more durable solutions. She talked about like lawsuits and having to deal with that. I've seen time and again where an administration, regardless of which side of the political spectrum they are on, have a project that's keenly important to them, and so they push through it really quickly, because they want to get it done in 4 years, and because they need they need to get it moving from a political standpoint. And I think there's two things that I see like very frequently. One is that they discount like career civil servants and the experts, the ologists, biologists, archaeologists, all the folks who like know what the condition is on the ground. And then they discount the local civil servants who know the communities and who are giving, and so it's very hard in a large bureaucracy. You have to be intentional as an administration in seeking those people out and pulling them into the conversation, the same you do with communities and the folks who live nearby whatever action you're planning to do. Uh, and if you don't do that, you will get sued. And if it will, like, you might be gone, right? The administration might have moved on, but that project, the shovels aren't going to be going in the ground. There are going to be issues. There's going to be times where they're not considering reports they should be considering, where they're not considering inputs or impacts. And all it takes is one federal law getting triggered, one thing that they miss, for them to have to pull back and redo all of the analysis. And we see that a lot in the federal government because people will leave, think high-fiving with talking points of like, we got the project done. In the end, a lawsuit happens and we have to redo it anyways.
To me, that's part of your due diligence, right? Whenever you're doing your project, you check with whoever the staff person is that's embedded on the ground, right? Because they know the community, they know what the history is with the community. Because a lot of times with these big projects, what you're dealing with is a history of disinvestment, a history of distrust from the community, right? People have come there and promised them things before. And like your example of, we've got to get this done, right? And kind of gloss over the folks who live there and the local experts. And then they have a problem on the back end and they can't figure out why they're getting sued, right? It's it's so much more than, hi, we're from the government and we're here to help you. It's, hi, we're from the government and we are here to work with you to make sure that we get the best project for everyone, right? Not just the developer.
Yeah.
Interesting. As both of you were speaking that, I was thinking to myself, okay, we're speaking on the project level now, but how would any of this change if we're speaking on the actual policy level, proposal level? Because I know just from experience that just the stakeholdering process for any large policy proposal can take quite a number of years, be challenged in court, drag on. But then if it's done right, can have real positive impacts on public health while also not hurting things like economic development. Both can actually happen at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say not only both can happen at the same time, for it to be meaningful and actually have an impact, both have to happen at the same time. I think there's these talking points that economic development is somehow at odds with environmental justice or social, but in the, like, even if you look at the conservative views of it, usually every dollar spent on clean energy returns $2 to $7 in public health savings in the next 20 to 30 years, right? We have we have a reality where we have a system that has been built unjustly. I don't think, I think that is a fact. We can't look past redlining. We can't look past some of the other policies they're not centuries old, right? They're very much done in the modern era of our country. And we know race is the strongest predictor for exposure to pollution in our country. It's not age, it's not income, it is race. And Black children are 7, sometimes 10 times more likely to die from asthma than white children. Those things are facts that we have to grapple with when we make these policies. So we have to be very intentional about making sure that we drive home the fact that we're spending billions. I think it's like over $80 billion a year to treat asthma, but less than 2% of that money actually goes to preventing it, right? We are not spending money in a smart way. And so the policies need to be mindful of that because it actually does give us a return on investment on top of being morally the correct thing to do.
But I think the problem comes in where the the cause of the issue, right, is paid for out of a different bank account than the prevention, right? And so the prevention is invisible, right? When I worked in environmental health, the biggest problem we had was telling people who we were and what we do. And, the food outbreak that didn't happen is our bread and butter, right? Like we're really proud that we were preventing things, but it's so hard to quantify and to, basically to let people know that why this is important. And I think this is public health issue writ large right now with the defunding, and they're seen as the bad people since COVID. But back to your other point of we created this system of inequity. And the only way to go about dismantling that is to look at these cumulative impacts anytime you go into a community. You have to look at their history. You have to look at what the health outcomes are of that history. Why do they have the current vulnerabilities that they have? Why are they more susceptible, as you were pointing out, to asthma, to air pollution, to obesogenic effects from air pollution in newborn babies, even? Right. And so why do these things exist? And is there anything that we can do in our current project to either prevent things from getting worse or to help take care of some of these inequities and to try to stop them? Right. And all this work that I've done, but starting with the NEJAC and then continuing on into my community work around cumulative impacts, is about that. Right. I come from a community where, we were the dumping ground. Anything that was undesirable went in the north end of Escambia County, Florida. There's a paper mill, right? This is where all the landfills are. And it's just, right. We lived on a river and it's polluted and we were drinking that water and no one cared. You go to the newspaper and they're like, well, people get cancer and people die. And I'm like, 7 people in my immediate family? There's something wrong here, right? But these are the communities we're talking about. How did it get that way? Why was that land devalued at that time? And so this is where we put people who had few choices, right?
Yeah.
And then we did things to them. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited.
No, absolutely. And frankly, it's a topic I get passionate about also. And just going back a little bit for people who haven't heard this story, technically my background is air quality work for around 20 years, compliance and permitting. But then I really got hooked on environmental justice and cumulative impacts when New Jersey first proposed their law about 5 years ago. And then ever since that point, when I really started to understand what cumulative impacts was, that was it. I mean, that's kind of I got focused on that a lot and that, okay, this is something I'm supposed to be doing here. And there's a lot of room that I saw for potentially helping corporations who, in my experience, the average one wants to do the best they possibly can. They want to meet their permit. But on an air permit level, just as an example, there just might be too many of them located in the same general area. And I hear all the time, what else am I supposed to do? I'm meeting my permit requirements. I'm well under my potential to emit. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. What else can they ask of me? So that's where the importance of some of the policies like the New Jersey EJ law come into play. But unfortunately, and this isn't going to surprise anybody, that law is also being challenged in court right now on multiple levels. Historically, public policy has helped public health improve over time, but it's still allowed for hot pockets, the higher asthma rates in certain areas. Is the cumulative impact laws like New Jersey and other states are currently going after how we have to try and tackle that?
I think so. There are currently 10 states that have some type of cumulative impact law, and New Mexico is theirs is still on the table. And to me, unless you put it into the regulatory framework where people have not existed before, right? Like there's some kind of minimum thing. Oh, you have to do community involvement, which is going and telling people what you're going to do. To me, the cumulative impact laws puts people back into the equation of regulatory framework. And these policies will help give people a voice, will help lift up lived experience, will help the permit be more people centric instead of just saying, well, you're allowed to put this much pollution in the air, water, or ground. And if you don't exceed that, then you're all good to do whatever you want to do. Right. And that's kind of where we're at now, policy wise. And personally, I would love to see more requirements for engagement, even if you don't go all the way to cumulative impacts, but more requirements for authentic engagement and using that engagement as evidence in your work, in your policy work, in your permitting work, and lifting that up. I mean, it's just as important in my view as the scientific data, right? I think it should be co-equal. There's a lot of controversy around that, obviously, because, especially my friends in the regulatory side are like, no, we have laws and we have to follow these laws. And I'm like, yes, but there are policies that flow from those laws. There are administrative rules that get promulgated from those laws that can include a wide variety of things. And I don't think we're taking advantage of all the levers.
I agree with everything there. I think there's also been a lot of misinformation that has been given to the public in general, but very much so in the United States and very much so in red states, where folks are being told that regulation is the antithesis to freedom, that if we regulate, you will not be free. And I think that the fact of the matter is that, like, deregulating, all it does is remove red tape for people that are trying to do things that may harm other people. Regulations do not undermine our freedom, and in fact, they are good investments. Even in Trump's EPA, I believe in 2020, they said that 30 for every dollar spent under the Clean Air Act, for every dollar spent, it's yielded $30 in saved money per year for Americans by avoiding deaths, by reducing hospital visits, by reducing missed work. So, like, we have the information to know that it is really important to regulate industry, because industry, even when it is at its best intentions, is going to be focused primarily on being successful in business. And that is why we as a society have come together and formed countries and laws, is to be able to regulate our markets to prevent them from doing exactly what they have been doing in many cases, in most places, in communities that are BIPOC or low income or rural, and places that are either disenfranchised or do not have the resources to lobby at the same capacity as the company that is putting the facility there. So community driven information oftentimes, I think, is required to go hand in hand with the scientific information, because there's many examples where the absence of data is itself a data point, right? If you look at some of the islands, if you look at St. Croix, if you look at some of the territories, the actual data on air quality, on water quality, there, we have not spent as a federal government money on putting stream sensors and water quality sensors and monitors in those places. And we also haven't done a great job of figuring out how to calculate cost of living in those areas versus other places. So when we do like nationwide tools like we did at the White House with CJust, it's really hard to know what is the equivalent community in some of the like coastal communities or places that are very expensive to live, like Alaska, and how do we actually factor in where people are living in poverty, where they're living in places where they don't have the ability to lobby their own government on their behalf. And really, like, we expect and should expect as American citizens the federal government to do the right thing in these places, to not discount anyone's input just because of where they live or how much money they have in their bank account. That everyone deserves a seat at the table, and that oftentimes that's where we're going to get the most durable solutions anyways.
And I think it's people who make policy, especially at the national level, I think that they have the best of intentions, right? Like, but as my ecology teacher told me, you can't just do one thing, right? You're trying to, it's kind of like an amoeba. And when you push into one area, it pops out in another area, right? It's trying to keep that balance in policy development and to try to see as many possible outcomes as you can and, plan for that. But I think as a person who used to make policy, especially like when I worked for the state, you have to get the right people in the room, but you also have to get the regulated community in the room and find out where are their pain points. How is this going to impact them? How much is this going to cost them? And how do you address that as you're making the policy? I mean, sometimes the answer is they just have to pay, but you have to make a case to them for what's in it for them, right? For them to be able to cooperate and want to do this, they have to see an outcome for their business, right? And rightly so. That's the business they're in. In government, right? Like we are worried about the common good. And I think this is the turning point in January where we no longer care about the common good.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. But I wanted to also ask one final one just on how public policy development should work and how stakeholder input and hearing from the public and that lived experience and lived knowledge actually informs public policy priorities and choices.
I'll say, I mean, I think it's funny because on paper, in many instances, I think we, as the federal government, I still say we because I still feel connected, even though I don't work as a civil servant anymore. Uh, like we've had good processes on paper. Like people have come together and we like it's not a mystery. It always makes me think, I don't know if either of you read Bill Bryson, but he talks about the three stages of scientific discovery. Like first we say it's not true, then we say it's not important, and finally we credit the wrong person with discovering it. And like, I feel like we're somewhere between the last two when it comes to actually like building durable policy and smart policy in this country. We know and we have regulatory frameworks to pull in public comments. But I think back to a very good manager I had, I'll call him out, Anthony Bobo Jr., who told me when I was trying to figure out like how do I make sure people know I'm genuinely coming to this um with good intentions. And he told me the best way to be genuine or to seem genuine is to just be genuine, right? And I think the federal government could learn a lot from that, right? If we are going to go through publishing proposed rules on regs.gov and accept public comments on them, then we should look at those public comments. We should also find ways to make it easy for people to submit those public comments. And we should resource the people who are going through that rule development or that policy development so that they can actually take the time to read through and consider it. And they're not pulling in teams of contractors to go through and just say, find the two nuggets in here that, propose a new or have a new study that we missed. There are ways to do it more genuinely, but you do have to, in policy, go slow to go fast. Like if you do not do the intentional stuff up front, the pre-planning, the engagement, and you try to rush through it, you are not going to have a good product in the end. And we know that. I mean, we have rules on it, and we still are tempted to not follow them.
But I think you're right, right? It exists in public policy, it exists in our rules and regulation. I just pulled together for a paper I'm writing all of the documentation where the federal government talks about lived experience, whether they call it community involvement, community engagement, everything on Aaronstein's ladder, right? All the way up to, we went with you and did this together with you. And what I see is this kind of patchwork um, quilt, if you will, of different agencies, saying they do it in different ways and at different levels. And what I'm looking at now is like, how authentic is each of those levels, right? Like, where are the examples where this has gone well so that we can lift those up and show outcomes? And where are the examples of, we informed the community and then we did what we were supposed to do, but we didn't really communicate back with them. And it's really hard to find examples where it's been done well, honestly.
It is.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, at the same time, we're being told we can't afford like the like it's almost like instead of starting with goals in some of these conversations, we're starting with specific outcomes and working our way back, which is why it seems so disingenuous, I think, in things that are happening right now in Washington, D.C. It's like being told we can't afford clean air and we can't afford clean water and we can't afford safe drinking water and we can't afford, clean energy jobs, even though they're better jobs and there's more of them. We're like, there's all these things where we're like, this is too much, and yet we're giving tax cuts to people who make over $500,000 a year. That's an insane amount of money. I mean, I just like put, even if you're living in New York City, that's a real good living. Wherever you're living in the United States, I don't care if you're in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, living in a ski villa, that's a great income. And the fact that you're getting a tax cut before we're like, we have Navajo Nation and other reservations that have been under a boil water advisory for 2 freaking decades, and we're saying we're giving tax cuts to wealthy people. The wealthy people are doing just fine. Like, they're doing all right. We do not need to help them anymore. I'm not saying they're our enemies. We live with them. But like, they don't need help. We don't need to be spending our time and money there. We can actually make policies that help people.
I
Yeah.
was I was taught the philosophy is that if you're planning for the people who have the fewest choices, everyone else will be okay.
I like
Right?
that. I like that. Um, I want to transition now a little bit, and we started to talk about this already, but Ryan, I'll start actually with you on this one because you were heavily involved in the IRA development. And I liked a lot of what that tried to do because it tried to tackle objective needs. We have to build better bridges. We need new th things to get us ready for the coming century. We just have to do it. Let's do this the right way, put money out there now. And what was that process like to try to tackle something so big? But still affect so much potentially positive change in every corner of the country compared to what you have witnessed over the last few months in the current federal administration.
I'll say, but I was really my time at the White House. I worked with some really, really smart, really, really passionate and dedicated folks. It is a big job for a very small group of people. I say, like, there's some things that I learned, like it's really hard when you have more than one office being in charge of the same thing, because it's not like bureaucracies don't do well with trying to combine different groups and silos. Like, you still need accountability and decision making. But I also think there's so much in legislation, even in great legislation like the IRA, that it is made by folks who have never had to implement legislation. And you can just tell, like, it's like, as a teacher, it feels like when you're reading an AI paper versus one someone wrote. It's hard to describe, but you can tell, the difference. Especially if you've done it long enough. So there are, I mean, and here's the thing, it is a huge generational investment, the IRA, the bill, but there's still, like, on an annual basis, that's 0.6% of the federal budget. Right. So, like, it's still crazy to me that in the past 4 months, we've been demonizing all of these inefficiencies, when even in the previous Trump administration, all of their research showed that we were actually getting like a 7-to-1, 30-to-1, sometimes 60-to-1 return on every dollar spent in climate change and in clean energy jobs. And in fact, When I worked at Interior, I leased it and we permitted a ton of solar and a ton of wind development under the first Trump administration. We just didn't call it solar and wind. We just called it energy, right? Because it was the only one that people actually wanted to permit and get done because it's it's clearly the cheapest way to generate energy in our country. So like there's all these things about IRA and the spending coming out of them that were complicated. But in the end, it's it's something that the federal government's actually very well suited to because it's been developed over time. The biggest challenge in them is that the legislators didn't actually, in many cases, give additional funding to the agencies to increase their capacity to implement these. So even with good intentions, if I'm a team of three people running an annual grant program that's 200,000 $1 million worth of grants a year, and all of a sudden I have $1 billion that I have to handle, and it says, by the way, you can hire zero point 0.5 new staff to help you with this workload. I mean, and people really did. Like I will say, if you look at how hard the civil service worked to get those implemented and to help the administration, because we realized how important it would be to the American people, to get those jobs out, to get that money out. Civil service worked tirelessly. And I think the hardest thing for me is seeing that after like 4 years of really trying to get meaningful implemented policy out. And I watched people work, I was on at 2 a.m. with people on phone calls, says we wanted to talk to Alaska from DC. And people were literally putting in almost double the hours without asking for comp time, the civil service gets a bad rap for being inefficient. I'll tell you, I've just not seen it. I think it is a made up talking point, and that we really don't deserve our civil servants. They are so dedicated.
I
But
think that's
in the
President Reagan, right? He vilified the civil service and
Yep.
just kept doubling down on it. I don't get it. I saw what you saw. I saw people very up close and personal at the Office of Environmental Justice at EPA. I saw them working night and day to get that money out the door, right? No asking for help. No, they knew they weren't going to get any help, right? There were no additional staff members approved, and they were trying to get millions of dollars out to communities as quickly as they can because they only had 26 months to do it,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
And then now they're being vilified. Now they're sitting on administrative leave. They have no certainty in employment and healthcare. I know folks who are still on and who are suffering through rough things because they have staff who have spouses with cancer, right? And that healthcare is what they need healthcare. It's really unfair the way that the folks who have been implementing the IRA have been treated, but I mean, it is something that has radiated out across the country, and it required the entire federal civil service to basically turn an aircraft carrier on a dime and start doing good work. And they did. So I really think the heroes of the IRA and the bill and all of that are your average like park rangers, your superintendents, your forest supervisors, the folks that are out in the field who are trying to figure out like how do we make these projects in a way that we are actually um building an environment that makes people's water drinkable and their air breathable and ability to get outside and enjoy the world and the country in which we all live. Yeah, I think they were heroes in all of this and are now being discarded, which is hard to see.
Agreed. And just to take that a step further, I suppose, I mean, each administration is going to have their own priorities, but the needs for action, especially on something as objective as building a new bridge, as an example, doesn't change. So, take just I don't want to go too hypothetical here, but what happens over time if those needs are not addressed?
just what you've seen, right? Bridges falling down, a boat hits it or lightly taps it, right? And the whole thing comes down. The roads that you're driving on, they're not going to get fixed. We have lots of road damage here in DC from the tanks that rolled through, and there's no money to fix that stuff, right? That's not in the budget. And I think localities are already struggling, to do their local roads and to keep up with their infrastructure. And with federal funding dwindling for this kind of work, states aren't going to have it to give to localities. And so it's already being seen, right? The
Yeah.
impacts of this is already being seen. And the role of the federal government, they're a big insurance company with an army, right? The role of the federal government is to protect people and to manage risk. And they've just decided that's not their job suddenly.
Yeah. And I guess just to go off of that, Ryan, if a lot of this is attempted to be moved from the federal government to the state level, how long would something like that take to build up capacity, and wouldn't it end up costing more money and actually provide a lower quality service?
Uh, I think it will certainly be inconsistent, right? And I think that's the hard thing is that there are going to be states that can't figure it out, whose legislatures disagree, or in ways that the are easier to do at the federal level with the services and support of the federal government, and they're going to have a hard time, right? We might see the New Yorks or the Californias that have already been well ahead on some of the equity work and some of the climate investments be able to take a leadership role in this place a little bit more. But we're going to see plenty of states that are just, they were reliant on the federal government to help them do the right things, to help them, put in air quality monitors to do so that there's going to be places where they don't even have the data to know. They don't have the policies to engage the communities to help like fill in where they don't have the data. It's going to be very slow for many states to step into this role, and in the end it's going to require the same and probably even more levels of organizing by ordinary people who have day jobs, who have things that they have to worry about that aren't just the like facilities that are near their community. They've got to worry about putting food on the table in an economy that's getting less and less affordable for the average person. So it's going to be really hard. It's going to take decades to come back from this. Even if you were to say we're starting today with a new federal government, we have lost. Even if I just count the people I personally know in the federal government who have left, their years of knowledge is over the hundreds of thousands of years of institutional knowledge. And it's gonna sometimes it'll be something so stupid as in even this administration is going to try to do something, and the only person that knows how to fill out the forms to get that contract out or to get that has been fired, and they don't even know where the form is. They don't have a digital file for it. It literally sits in a cabinet box somewhere. And so you're going to be talking about hundreds of man hours or lots of money going to private contractors that's going to cost the federal government more and the state governments more to do the same thing that we could do in a way more affordable model if the federal government were leading it.
That just makes me want to
100%.
cry, to be honest.
But I think there's states that have already abrogated their responsibility. Florida is an extreme example. Local government in Florida is funded by property tax. The governor has proposed to repeal property tax. So, the state isn't going to take any federal road money or any federal money, period, according to the legislature. And they're taking away the local government's ability to raise funds. So what's going to happen to their infrastructure? Who's going to fix their roads? Who's going to rebuild the bridge in Tampa after the hurricane, right? Like there's no FEMA. So whose responsibility is that? And does it just devolve into chaos? Which is what I'm afraid of.
Oh, I agree with that. And going back to something from the last administration, there was a lot of positive work, I think, being done through grants. And I loved the Tic Tac program to set up the hubs around the country of people who were involved in this work already, capable of leading it and capable of getting money at the door quickly. Ryan, I know that you're currently involved, I think, with the lawsuit to try to get some of that EPA money for EJ grants back to the people who were awarded the money. I don't know if you want to comment on that, on how that's
I
going, or if you can at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, what I will say is I think the other thing that has to happen, given the absence of the federal government in this space, is that academic institutions, nonprofits, all of the groups that are saying we want to provide services to the public, like we are going to have to be better coordinated and we are going to have to be really stepping into a role that it was not meant for us, right? This is why I'm so thankful to have found Lawyers for Good Government and been in this role. So we have been working to fight in many cases for 600 billion plus dollars that the federal government has legally, under the direction of Congress, awarded in various grants and various programs. And, in many cases, these are EPA grants. There's also across the federal government, USDA, DOE, DOT, Department of Interior, Education. There are grants coming out to help communities do things that we think are important and that Congress thought were important. And the federal government, in many of these cases, entered legally binding agreements with these groups, told them you are going to get this money to do this work, whether it's setting up, monitoring for lead in drinking water, whether it is monitoring air pollution and carcinogens off of factories, whether it's installing more transportation in communities that don't have a way to get to school or to the grocery store, addressing food deserts. These are all things that I think generally every person in America would agree are good things. This money was guaranteed. Many of these organizations, people left their jobs, took these organizations, started these organizations, and now the government's pulled that funding back illegally. So I think first thing we need to do is coordinate, and I've been thankful that L4GG has kind of been quarterbacking in many instances the pushback and the legal pushback on this to say these funds are guaranteed. You have entered a contract. There are terms and conditions. The federal government does not get to walk back money that Congress has directed that the government's awarded. It would be the same thing as paying a contractor to do work, having them build a house for you, and then saying, "Well, we're not going to pay you for that, even though we have a contract," right? You're going to lose. And so I think it is scary to say this because the judicial system and the judicial branch of government certainly feels uh, a little bit rocky right now. But we are winning in the courts. We are winning on the law. It is going to take a long time because every time we win, similar to every time you find a fossil, there's now two new gaps that you have to explain to people that don't believe in evolution. Every time we win on the law, they go and try to find another justification for doing it because they are willing to do illegal things right now. So to me, we all have to continue to sue them. We have to continue to fight for the money that came out under the IRA and the bill that is already promised to communities, that is legally obligated to those communities. And we also have to make sure that with this one big beautiful bill you talked about, that they don't repeal this money illegally and use it as a way to hide it and stow it in other places and use it for tax cuts for people who make over $500,000 a year.
Well, I think it's important work for a lot of reasons, but the biggest in my mind is that a lot of that money is intended to go directly towards improving public health. There's lots of different ways, lots of different hows, but that's really the goal here. And I don't think that can get lost because that's just dangerous if it does. Um, Interesting. Well, I know we're starting to come off on time here a little bit, and I always want to leave time for final thoughts, but then also I always ask a version of the same final question because the largest demographic historically of folks who listen to this podcast is students and young people, undergrad, grad school, high school, who are interested in these issues, but sometimes feel a little hopeless, a little not sure how to get started, not sure if their actions actually make a difference at all. So if you can each take a few minutes and if you have anything to say to them.
I think my advice would be get involved, right? It's easy in this crazy world when there's just all this information coming at you 24 hours a day and it's all negative and it sounds like the world is ending some days, right? Watching the news can feel like a walk through the book of Revelation, honestly, these days. And so, my advice is to find something that you are passionate about, that you can tend your small garden where you are, make a difference where you are. If you are worried about air pollution in your community, get involved with a community-based organization whose goal it is to improve air quality. Get involved. And if there's not a group that you want to get involved in, start a group, right? Organize, be ready when the time comes for action, right? The NEJAC, even though they're not sanctioned to meet, they're not supported in any way by EPA staff anymore, they're still meeting, right? They found a sponsor in the UCS, Union of Concerned Scientists, and they're continuing to meet and advocate for communities. So even in the absence of structure, you can also still make a difference.
I love that. In the absence of structure, you can still make a difference. I, you know, it is, I feel like every year it's harder to be a young person in our country. You participate in an education system that you're told is fraudulent and misdirecting. You don't know where to learn, where to trust. You certainly see adults in the world as you're coming up acting worse than most children. We have created a national debate in where we are not actually, I think, communicating as adults in this space in a way that we would ask our children to exist in this space. And I'll say, I'm no longer young, but as an elder millennial who came into environmental policy in this space, there's a long time where I was told, you just sit here, do the work, don't give us your opinion, you don't have to participate, you don't need to be in this space, you're not a leader yet. And I'll say, like, having found myself in leadership roles, it's far more important, like Sandra was saying, to be passionate and find something you're passionate about and work with people who are passionate about it. I think Simon Sinek talks about finding your why as an organization and leading with that. And to me, that is what I want. I want students coming up, like, find your why, find out what motivates you, find out there are many problems in this world and we need everyone to solve them. Whether if you want to be a nurse, I want you to go be a nurse. I want it to be easy for you to be a nurse. If you want to be a doctor, same thing. If you want to be a scientist or a climatologist, I want the resources in this country to exist to help you to do that, because we need all that expertise. We need all of those people, all of those services. And right now, we're being told that we can't afford clean water. We can't afford clean air. We can't afford safe drinking water. We can't afford to train people to do clean energy jobs, to install solar panels. At the same time, we're saying what we can afford is more yachts, more tax havens. We can afford fossil fuel subsidies. We can afford all of these things. And there is a hypocrisy that I know young people see in this world. And it's not just an economic hypocrisy, it's a moral hypocrisy. They are seeing people in leadership positions lying to them, telling them things that they know to be untrue, to try to get some sort of economic advantage or score points for a very select few group of people. And they are exposed to this on a daily basis. So what I want to say to students is just get involved, find what you care about. You will make a difference. If you do that alone, you're going to make a difference, and you don't have to solve all of the world's problems, but also Like, first rule that I say, always do the right thing. I say that to all of my staff. If you are trying to do the right thing in every circumstance you're in, your intent is going to be important, and it will help you meet people who are also trying to do the right thing, and build community. And then that is how collectively, as a country and as a society, I think we're going to have to move forward.
No, I think that's right. And thank you both. This has been a very, very informative hour or so for me. And I know the listeners will also get a lot out of this, but I just wanted to also end on a final thought to all the planners and people thinking of policy out there to, as I said at the beginning, always focus on the economic, environmental, and social and think about where those intersect. And that area oftentimes is public health and it's building communities and they call it thriving communities for a reason. Because if we do this right, if we put the thought in and do the slow work, as Ryan said, to be able to advance quicker, we're gonna stop living in the silos that we are right now and understand that we live in systems. And all of our choices affect each other. And there are a lot of challenges out there, but also a lot of opportunity for smart, passionate people to make positive impact. So I invite all of you to try, as Ryan said, to find your why. And thank you very much for everybody listening. And for those who might be listening for the first time, you can follow us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, the zillion other podcast platforms I'm forgetting right now, and never miss an episode. So, Sandra, Ryan, thank you very much.